First airing in 2013, this show has amassed a large fan base over the course of 4 seasons. With huge production value, mature themes, it is no wonder why this anime has become such a cultural icon. Let's talk Attack on Titan.
No, I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum!
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson Olson. Here we talk about all things entertainment, and today we are talking the hit anime show called Attack on Titan. Like I said, there's 4 seasons. It's an anime, and I kind of have some gripes with anime, and we'll kind of get into that here in a minute. But yeah, the show just ended last Saturday, the 4th. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. I only recently got into Attack on Titan, not like recently as in like a month, but a couple months ago, like I believe May or April is when I started watching the show. And so I'm still fairly new to the fan base. I haven't been as dedicated for as long of a time as many others have, because it has been a show going on for 10 years, only 4 seasons, but it's taken a good amount of time to produce each season because it is well produced. And so with that kind of comes a lot of things. And so my first thing is I kind of have some gripes with anime, just in general, not with Attack on Titan specifically, just with anime in general. I don't tend to watch a lot of animes, and there are kind of a couple reasons for that. One being that the frame rate is usually really low, and this kind of is more of a personal thing because it doesn't bother everyone, as it shouldn't, because it's not a universal thing. But if you know anything about animation, you know how the standard for movies or TV is 24 frames a second. And to have pretty smooth animation, you usually animate on something called 2s. So there are 12 frames per second. So for every other frame, there's a new drawing. In anime, sometimes it is drawn on 3s or 4s, so it's less pictures per second, and that can tend to make it look a little bit more choppy. And to me, I don't usually like that. Kind of bugs my eyes, and I don't like how non-fluid it is. And there are exceptions to this, of course, but for the most part, anime is animated on less frames a second, and sometimes that drives me a little nuts. Like I said, there are exceptions like Studio Ghibli movies, which I don't know if you would consider anime, but I don't know, kind of similar style. Or Attack on Titan, there are a lot more fluid moments that kind of make up for it. There are still some low frame rate moments, but they're used sparingly and more specifically, and so that becomes less of a problem for me with this show. And another thing about anime, typically, to me, of course, this isn't going to be the case for everyone, a lot of the characters look exactly the same. It's that anime hairstyle that everyone knows. I don't particularly care for it. I know it's like a trend and it fits the style, but I don't usually like it because I think it's kind of a cop-out. I wish there was a lot more uniqueness in character design in anime, and that's one reason why I don't always care for it, because I just want it to look different. In other animation styles, usually things look vastly different, and it's easy to distinguish characters, and that isn't always the case in anime. Usually the main characters are pretty distinguishable, but anything else, it's going to be just a blend of the same thing over and over, and I don't particularly like that. And then also, because of these things, I need a very compelling story in my animes to be able to really catch my attention. And I know that's the case for a lot of people. Not all anime is going to be for everyone, and that's okay, because just like all stories, it's not going to be for everybody. So with anime specifically, it's usually harder because of the other things. It's hard for me to find a good enough story that I can overlook those other things. There are a few animes that I've watched. I've watched like typical like children's animes because like everyone's seen Pokemon, and then another one I really liked that's basically Yu-Gi-Oh with dinosaurs, which is Dinosaur King. I really like that one as well. And then there's only been like one other anime show that I've watched, which is Your Lie in April, and I like that one. That one's pretty sweet and kind of wholesome throughout it. And then finally Attack on Titan. And so it's these kind of combinations of things that make me kind of have a gripe with anime and why it kind of deters me most of the time. Sometimes I see anime like clips and trailers and I'm like, that actually seems kind of interesting, but the animation production doesn't seem to grasp my attention as much as other animes or other animations in general do. Typically, I like the more Western style animation rather than more anime style, but that is just me. That's just my preference. But I can see why people like the anime style. I know my sister really likes it, and I have a lot of friends who really like anime style, and that's kind of like, I understand. I can put myself in their shoes. It just isn't always for me. But Attack on Titan is a bit different. It definitely did catch my attention, and for several reasons, because it has that more fluid animation. The show has very high-paced energy, and so it has to have more fluid animation because you can't have very choppy action in action sequences. And so they typically tend to make things a lot more fluid, or if things are a bit more quote-unquote choppy, it's used intentionally. So very often these characters have these like contraptions that kind of let them swing through the city and things like that, and swing around titans, which titans are these like giant people essentially that eat normal people. And so they kind of get around this, like even though they're using like a 1 or 2 frames when they're flying through things, it's done well because the rest of the frame, like the background, is very blurred. It looks like you have that motion blur. And so that makes it look less out of place to me, and it bothers me a whole lot less. And then another thing with Attack on Titan is their story is incredible. It is very compelling, and you have a lot of big emotional moments. Every character that is like very integral to the story gets their time to shine. You get a lot of background about them, and it makes you care for each character. Because there's a lot of characters who die in this, you want to have that emotional attachment to them. And had it not given each character enough time to do that, you would lose that attachment. You wouldn't really feel compelled to actually listen to all of the show and pay attention because they're not compelling characters. But this show does really good at making you like each character, and you can have a favorite character, and it's understandable why you would like each character. And even villains, they get a lot of time developed into them, and so that is just good storytelling in general, and that's something I don't always see in any animation or any story really. And so having something that I don't normally see have a really compelling story makes me incredibly interested, because it's so good that even someone who doesn't typically care for the style still wants to watch it because it's that good of a story. And they have fairly distinguishable characters. It is not really hard to determine who is on screen at that moment. You're like, oh yeah, I know who that is. I know this person's name. I know that person's name, because they all look different and they all have different roles. And that is very important. Just once again, in storytelling in general, you should be able to distinguish all your characters fairly easily. And in this show, sometimes that can be hard because a lot of the characters are kind of in like this force that makes them all wear the same kind of uniform, and that makes it harder to distinguish characters, but still based on their facial features and their hair and the way they talk and the way they act, that shows distinguishability, and you actually can understand what's happening on screen, because you're not like, who the heck am I watching right now? You know exactly which character is on screen. And kind of along with that, and along the acting side of things, the English dubs for Attack on Titan, I'd say, are pretty good, because I am a fiend and a menace to the anime community because most people think that subbed anime is a lot better. And if you don't know what I'm saying, basically subbed means it's originally in Japanese, as they all are, and subtitles are in English. And that's what sub means. And so people kind of prefer that because it's more true to the original material. And I agree, it is more true to the original material, but I'm an idiot and I have ADHD and like to do a whole bunch of things at the same time while I'm watching my shows. So I prefer the dubbed versions, which means it has been dubbed over or they re-recorded lines in English and put them over the animation. So instead of it being Japanese, they removed that and they put in English words instead. And, you know, maybe that's kind of skewing a bit of the meanings, and it most likely is, and you're kind of missing some things. I prefer to watch animes that way just because I can't pay attention all the time. And so, you know, I'm kind of a fiend against the anime community for that because most of them think you should watch it just with subtitles, but that's just me. I need some English dubs. But the last two episodes, the finale parts, were all in Japanese. So I did have to pay a lot more attention to that, which is okay because they were fantastic. And, you know, this show kind of has some more mature themes, and it's more of a mature animated series. This is not an anime for children. If you are a parent or anything and you're watching like Pokemon or Dinosaur King and you're like, oh, maybe they could watch this, they cannot. Do not show a kid this. It's a good show, but there's a lot of death. A lot of the Titans are essentially nude. Like they don't have like any private parts, but they are essentially nude. They are just large naked humans basically. And so that is definitely on the visual side a lot more adult, and on the like adult side and theme, there's a lot of death. There's a lot of parallels with historic events, specifically like the World Wars. There's a plot in this series where the Eldians, which are anyone who can become a Titan, whether like it's one of like the attack Titan or the female Titan, any of like the royal Titans, basically, I think is what they're called. I can't remember exactly. I binged it all in April, and then, you know, I've kind of just waited for the finale to come out. So I can't remember what they're all called. I'm sorry. But like all these people are of a certain like race essentially, and they're the only people who can turn into these Titans, and they're kind of used in a war, and people kind of shun them because they can turn into these monsters essentially. And so they kind of get shunned away, and it gives a lot of parallels to historic events where the same things happen with racism like that. And because of that, violence is used in this show very much with a purpose. It's not just meant to be violent because it's cool, which there are some really cool moments, but it's all based around the story that these people are essentially terrorized by Titans. And, you know, you don't find out later and that there's actually more to the world, but these people all think they're the last of civilization. And sorry, this is a spoiler warning, way late in the video. If you're listening to this episode, I'm assuming you've seen Attack on Titan. But like they all think they're the last of humanity, and there's all these Titans that can kill everybody. And so, you know, there's violence in this because they believe they're the last of humanity. And so they have to use violence very specifically. It's not just a murderous rampage. It's not, you know, killing things for the sake of killing things. It's because they're trying to let everyone survive. It's not just for the sake of violence. It's violence with a purpose. And, you know, with mature animation styles like this, I find people tend to put them off because adult animation has kind of been skewed, like adult/mature animation when you're referring to these things is probably an apt description. But that term has been kind of construed because typically what you think of adult animation is things like Rick and Morty, Family Guy, that are just used for cheap comedy and say things that aren't really mature. Like they label these shows as adult shows just as an excuse to swear or say really crass things. And I don't think that's what you should be doing. You can have mature animation that's not necessarily for adults, but it has more mature themes and more down-to-earth styles, and just, it's not an excuse to have something, it's just the effect of something. So it's a cause and effect kind of situation. So you have these kind of stories, and the effect is they're kind of a bit more adult. And I think good examples of this with that aren't like Family Guy and whatever are shows like Arcane, Regular Show, Invincible, shows that are more adult themed, but that's not the purpose of the story. It's not meant to be adult just for the sake of being adult. It's just because that kind of story is a lot more heavy. Think Arcane. That show could be kind of brought down to PG-13 if you really wanted to, but the adult side of things, where it's an undercity where there's a lot of crime, there's things like brothels and things like that, that's part of the world. That's part of the story they're trying to show. They're trying to show how dark and dingy things can be. And that's exactly what Attack on Titan is. It's showing the after effects of war. It's showing all these people being terrorized and having to rise up against things and fight. And that is mature animation without being quote unquote adult. It is not adult because the story is not adult. It's not written for adults. It's written as a good story that just happens to be more adult themed, if that makes sense. Hopefully that kind of did. But yeah, Attack on Titan is just a really good show, and I know I didn't go too much into the story of it, and that's because that's not entirely what this series is about. It's more to be more analytical, and I want everyone to be able to watch these things for themselves. And most of the time, that's why there's not a lot of spoilers, is so you can kind of still be able to experience everything yourself. And that's what I really like. So we kind of come to the end of our show, and so that brings us to the question of the week. And so you kind of have to have seen at least a little bit of Attack on Titan, or know at least a little bit about it, to be able to answer this question of the week. And that would be, what is your favorite of the Titans? And this is of like the big Titans, not just the common Titans. And like there's different ones, like the Attack Titan, which is meant to just have a lot of brute strength and of course fight. It's an attack kind of character. You have the Colossal Titan, which is just massive. The Armored Titan, which is meant to be kind of like a tank. And that happens to be my favorite Titan. I really like how the Armored Titan looks, because it is kind of that armor style with the muscles exposed. And I think it's a really interesting design. And I don't know, I like it. And the user of the Armored Titan also happens to be a blonde like me. And maybe that's like, I kind of can attach more to that character, because I'm like, ooh, looks like me. I could be this character. I could be him in a live action remake. But yeah, so question of the week is, what is your favorite of the Titans? But that kind of brings us to the end of the episode. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you've seen Attack on Titan, hopefully you really like it. Maybe this entices you to go and check it out for yourself if you've started or if you haven't yet. And so hopefully you get into it, because that's what this series is all about. And yeah, with that, until next time, see ya. You have been entertained.